Sister Aunt Davy, to getting in my own trap of, I hate it when Daddy calls me sister. Anyway, had her to teach on idolatry last week because we've been studying the book of Hosea. And so this week I would like to transition us from how idolatry lands you into slavery. So I ask this question every time about, and I don't know if y'all have answered me yet, so in case you ain't wondering, this is a test. So, what were we created for? Why did God create us? Relationship, right? Okay, so I'll probably ask that again next week, and I would love for everybody in unison to say relationship. So God created us for a relationship with Him. And we've already talked about how like particulars are revealed about our spiritual relationship through our earthly relationships, and that's one of the main themes of the book of Hosea. Because God is illustrating the pain that He feels from unfaithfulness in that story of Hosea, and Hosea and Gomer's marriage represents that relationship. So just to quickly cover a couple of definitions. Idolatry is not limited to just the worship of false images. That's what it mostly is talking about in the Old Testament, but we know that that's a foreshadowing of things to come. And in the New Testament, it even goes in further with idolatry besides just the false gods or false images. But it is placing anything or anyone before God as an object of allegiance and devotion. And we talked about God's covenant, the covenant with man. And He gave us all these promises, and all He asked for in return was to be faithful. So, idolatry is unfaithfulness. Worship. Let's talk about what worship means. It technically means to bow down to, which we often think of it as praise. So praising something, giving reverence to something. Even a servant would bow down to his master in the Bible. So when you see that master-servant relationship and bowing down or giving reverence, think of that could also be worship. Okay, so I hope that sort of caught some of y'all up a tiny bit that haven't been in here for the rest of the teaching. So I don't want y'all to answer this, but I want you to think about these questions. Why do you think Israel went for false gods when they were loved by the true God? Why would they even go for false gods in the first place when they were loved by the true God? Why do you think Gomer went for other lovers even after she had the love of Hosea and identity as his bride? Why did she even step out in the first place when she had what she thought she was looking for? In Hosea 13:6, it says, "When I fed them, they were satisfied. When they were satisfied, they became proud, and then they forgot me." They forgot me. In Deuteronomy 8:11-14, it says, "Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe His commands, His laws, and His decrees that I am giving you this day. Otherwise, when you eat and you are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large and your silver and gold increase, and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." And we've talked about that too. Anytime you see that about bringing them out of Egypt, you should automatically be thinking bringing them out of slavery and bondage. So the satisfaction that is talking about, it's not satisfaction in the sense of they didn't have any other like demands or complaints against God. It was complacency or ingratitude, a focus on what God has gave them instead of on the giver of those blessings. Okay, so now let's reverse and talk about us a little bit. So you probably may not identify yourself as a harlot or a adulterer, but do you consider yourself prone to wander? Prone to wander. What about your tendency toward tilting from God, wandering away from Him? Going from God and starting to increase more towards... Do y'all remember the story I told you about the Indian story? And he was telling the child about, the two wolves. And one wolf was good and, good, and one was bad. And he was like, well, which one of those wolves inside of me is going to win? And the grandfather said, the one that you feed the most.
Right.
The one that you feed the most. So, do we give more towards God, or do we wander away and start decreasing what we have for God and increasing the other? In Isaiah 53:6, it says, we all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way. We all have the tendency to get satisfied, get proud, and forget God. We all can wander and turn away. It could be that your idol making and worship is in the form of creating gods out of things you own, you want, or people you admire. And worshiping those idols would be your way of giving them lots of focus and credit and power in your life. In Matthew 6:24, it says, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. In other words, you cannot bow down to both. In Colossians 3:5, it says, put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. In Ephesians 5:5, it says, for of this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person, such a person is an idolater, has an inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. So some think of money or status when they think of modern day idols. An imbalanced desire for acceptance, an obsessive need for personal significance, or a selfish commitment to pleasure can also be considered idols. Money, status, acceptance, significance, pleasure, and comfort are not bad things in themselves. So it's not bad to want those things. They are good things. But when you have an elevated desire or need for any of those things in order to give you identity or a sense of completeness, then they are symptoms of the true idol, self. One teacher I read put it like this: idol, or idolatry. It's all about self. And I don't know if that brought to mind to you 2 Timothy 3:1-5. It says, but mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, right, lovers of money, yep, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power.
Doesn't sound like soap opera, does it?
Yeah, it
Sounds
did.
like an election.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So whatever we think about most is in effect serving as our God, our false gods, our idols. If it's always on our minds, if we are always on our minds, if your thoughts gravitate to things, people, situations, and objects that soothe you, please you, identify you, affirm you, that's lovers of selves rather than lovers of God. And we talked about that when I talked about do you really love God, or the first commandment. We talked about how what you love is what you're going to think about all the time. What you're going to sacrifice yourself for, right? And I've told y'all already, I struggle with Ashton. Not, fear of that, that I put her above God. Because I may not think about me all the time, but as a mom, I think about Ashton all the time. So back to Hosea. Gomer thought her lovers could give her something better than what Hosea gave her, that would make her feel something she wasn't feeling being at home with Hosea. In Hosea 2:5 it said, she said, I will go after my lovers who give me my food and water, my wool and my linen, my olive oil and my drink. Food and water there represents basic needs. Basic needs. My wool and linen was used to make clothes, so I think of that as like image. Your image. And oil and drink then was a luxury. So those were pleasure commodities. So pleasure type things. So do we think Hosea didn't give Gomer those things? I'm sure that he did. He gave her shelter and food and water and security and clothes and, things that brought her pleasure. But Gomer, supposedly the way she worded that, wanted something that she didn't have. But she did have it. The grass was greener on the other side, right? And I don't know how many of y'all will be truthful and say you can relate to that, but I do. I can be perfectly happy with my iPhone, let's say, and soon as the new one comes out, I think I gotta have it.
That's right.
Right?
Not guilty.
Yeah, flip
How
one
about
way.
guitars?
Pass, well, there's
No comment. Yeah,
Always a catch.
yeah.
You don't make those no more.
So anyways, can you relate to that? How, you think you're satisfied until something looks greener. Something looks greener on the other side. And suddenly that being happy with what you got goes away, and you begin to think that you've got to have that to be happy. So why do you suppose something in us can make our happiness seem dependent on having what others have? Why do we do that? Why do we think we've got to have it? And then when we get it, what happens? We get a buzz or a high even, right?
Mhm.
You get a buzz from that because you're like so excited, because it's new. And let me relate that to something now relationship-wise. It's also like the buzz you get when you first start dating somebody, right? So in that relationship, when it's brand new, you have this high and this excitement, and then that kind of goes away, right? You don't have that anymore. And sometimes you think, well, that might be why somebody steps out. It's because they want to just feel that excitement again, right? That buzz. But it's not sustainable, is it? It goes away, right?
Yep.
We try to fill the holes in ourselves with things that are not sustainable, those temporary highs. So then we have to chase the next high, and the next high, and the next high. What does that sound like?
Drug addict.
That's right, addiction. Thank you. Addiction. That sounds like addiction. So that leads to bondage or being a slave to that. A false God can only offer you a false sense of security, a temporary lack of conflict that will confuse you with peace, a fleeting delight that you think is pleasure until it fizzles out. So just a quick iteration here, just something that kind of came to me. Who is the imitator of the true God? Satan is, right? He's the big copycat. So he is the false God, right?
Yep.
He's the one going to try to fill those holes in us that need to be filled.
Yep.
That's right.
In Hosea 2:13 it says, She burned incense to the Baals. She decked herself with rings and jewelry and went after her lovers. But me she forgot, declares the Lord. In Hosea 4, 1-3, it reflects a sad condition, the sad condition of Israel that they were in while they were worshiping Baal. It says, there is no faithfulness, in other words, unfaithful. No acknowledgement, and I'm just going to say no, you didn't know God. No acknowledgement of God in the land. There is only cursing, lying, and murder, stealing and adultery. They break all bounds, and bloodshed follows bloodshed. Because of this, the land dries up, and all who live in it waste away. They had, down in verse 7, it says, they exchanged their glorious God for something disgraceful. So, what happens when you're addicted to something, on drugs, say? Do you not feel dried up and waste away? And you have to go for that next high
Yep.
to get you through, right?
Yep.
So, they exchanged their God for something disgraceful. Israel, Gomer, and we have exchanged marriage for an affair, love for lust, a husband for a lover. Our identity is a beloved bride for the indignity of a prostitute. And as a result of the choice that shows up in chapter 3, Gomer exchanged freedom for slavery. Okay, so who all now is like hating these holes that we have in us that we try to fill with this stuff? Anybody? Is anybody like hating them?
Yes.
But
Yeah.
don't. But don't. I got you.
Don't hate the home.
Don't hate the holes. We were created by God, right?
Yes.
For
Relationship.
relationships. He made those holes. He made those holes so we would seek to fill those holes.
Right.
So we're going to seek to fill those holes that can't be filled by anything sustainable without Him. He made us that way on purpose so that we would search for something to fill those holes. And hopefully, we find the thing that does sustain it and fill that void, that is sustainable.
That's right.
So don't hate the holes.
Can I take my answer back?
Does that make sense, though?
Oh, yeah.
So we were created that way on purpose so that we do find God and want to fill that void with something that's sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
So don't hate the holes. Okay, so how do you know when something or someone has become an idol in your life? Ask yourself these questions. Is it instead of God or along with God? Did it knock down God to second place? The minute you exchanged, right?
Yep.
So here's God, number one priority, love, right? The minute it exchanges, it becomes your idol, right? So look for that exchange. The exchange. Anything anybody's got to add? That's what I've got today. So now we get to go next onto the redemption part instead of all the
holes.
horrible we are. Anybody got anything to add? No?
Yeah.
Okay.
When I was filling those holes with unsustainable stuff, it was always thinking about the next time you have to refill that. But once I found God, I don't think about that anymore. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's
You're
permanent.
full, you're complete.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Uh-huh.
I don't feel like I'm worried about, tomorrow or an hour from now, or you know what I mean?
Mhm.
But it's a good, secure feeling. It's really awesome. Yeah. It
I was
beats
hoping
drugs
you
any
would
day.
speak up.
Yeah. Yeah, because I can identify with that,
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I seeked that for so long to where, it nearly killed me before I found God, but whatever it took, like it
Yeah.
says, whatever it takes.
Uh-huh.
And I actually, to tell you the truth, I'm so happy that happened where I found God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the holes nearly killed you,
Yeah.
but finally feeling it's what saved you.
That's what saved me.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amen.
Okay.
And you know what? If that's what it took, that's what it took. And I'm so happy, that happened to me. Instead of being mad that, you know what I mean? But no, I look at it as a blessing.
Yep.
Yes.
A huge blessing. The biggest blessing I've ever had in my life, you
Big
know?
time, big
And I've had a bunch of kids. Those are blessings, but that was the blessing that mattered, right there.
Yeah.
You know? The top one was God.
Yeah.
And he's right there still. And I will never turn my back on him like I did for so long. Because I've never felt this before and I love it. But it's better than any drug out there. And I'm telling you, I've done them all. Better than any drug out there.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Lon?